What's going on, people in internet land? Kimchi Chris here, and welcome to today's brand new episode of Rock Bliss with Kimchi Chris, where we are giving thanks. That's right. It might not be Thanksgiving, but we are thanking the one and only Ozzy Osbourne. Because just a few days ago, as of the recording of this episode, Ozzy announced his retirement from the touring world. It's something that all of us saw coming between his health and and even though we all saw it coming from 1,000 miles away, it's still sad and so finite when you hear the artist finally say it themselves, finally admit it to themselves, because these tour dates that he had postponed about 1 million times due to his own health and the pandemic, I don't know how anyone thought these were actually going to happen. If you were still holding on to your tickets, you're a true believer. And don't get me wrong, I know where you're coming from. If this was the same type of situation with Kiss or, well, Ozzy, I probably would have been in the same boat, but you gotta be real. And the people that were holding on to their tickets for the first show back out on the road, I think they were just curious as to what was gonna happen. Were they going to prop Ozzy up on a fence thing like they've been doing at these recent TV appearances? Were they gonna have him phone it in over a video screen with a live band? Were they maybe going to dangle him from a ceiling, kind of like he's a bat, kind of like the bats used to bite the heads off of? What were they going to do? I don't think anybody knew, and no one really wanted to admit that they didn't think it would probably be the best thing in the world. But you know, we all love Ozzy. We all love Ozzy, so we wanted him to make it through all of these medical conditions and health issues he's been having and make it back to the stage, but that's not happening now. And even though we did see it coming, it's still sad. It's still so sad when you see one of your heroes just end it like that. He didn't get a proper farewell show. He didn't get a proper farewell tour ending. This was a farewell tour, and it was his second farewell tour at that, but he didn't get a proper ending to it. He didn't know that his last show was going to be his last show, and that's a little bit heartbreaking for someone that has, you know, done this for his entire life. I can't imagine that Ozzy can imagine a world where Ozzy isn't going to return to the stage at some point. Even through all of this medical treatment and all these health issues and all of these things that were rather obvious that this wasn't going to end well, I'm sure Ozzy still hoped that he would make it to the stage. And I'm gonna be honest, I bet he would have went up there in a wheelchair. He would have been propped up, whatever it took, but it was really the fact that these conditions were really going to impede him from actually being able to travel. And to tour, you've got to travel. You gotta travel. Now I can already see some weekend warriors in their basement behind their keyboards angry that Kimchi Chris hasn't brought up Sharon Osbourne yet. I know that all the people like to point to her as the issue here, and that's why Ozzy was on the road perhaps a little bit longer than he should have, maybe stayed at the party a little bit long, but I don't know. As someone who appreciates doing the things they do in life, I think that he actually appreciated going on stage. I think he appreciates making music. I think he appreciates all this. I think that it's his entire life. As I just said a few minutes ago, he doesn't really know a life other than going on stage. Sure, he likes petting his puppy. Sure, he likes hanging out at the house. Sure, he likes staring into space, as we saw him do several times on the Osbournes. But I think he, at the end of the day, did enjoy the thrill of getting on stage and dumping that water on the crowd and cussing at the crowd and singing a few notes still in key after all these years. But before that, putting on amazing performances. I'm sure he enjoyed all of that and he looked forward to it. And even though the end was coming one way or another, I think he was looking forward to having a grand exit from this part of his life, and unfortunately he's just not going to get that now, and it's sad. It's sad, really. Regardless of the reasons behind the touring and who's pulling the strings and everything else, it's just sad we aren't going to get a proper ending to the saga of one of the greatest musicians, or at least the most entertaining musicians of all time that we all knew and we all love. That being said, they were very careful in their wording on the statement, saying this was the end of his touring career. So he might be intending to still put some new music out. Of course, there were the 2 records that came out in the last couple of years from Ozzy. I know a lot of people hated those records, but it was still nice to have a new Ozzy record and hold it in your hand and, you know, get mad about the fact that Post Malone was on it. It was a good thing. It was a thrill. And, you know, regardless if you loved or hate these records, one day we won't have a new Ozzy record to argue about, and then what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do then? Because that time is coming for a lot of our favorite artists. We're never gonna get to argue about a new Kiss record. There will be a day we won't get to argue about a new Alice Cooper record, or argue about an Aerosmith record. Will we get a new one of those? The last one was pretty bad, but I would embrace a new one to argue about. All of these guys are getting older, and we're going to start seeing a lot of them retire sooner or later, and I just think that it's good when they can do it in a more dignified way as opposed to just canceling what they have left and just being gone. But at the same time, in Ozzy's case, he deserves that rest. He deserves that reassurance that his fans will support him, because luckily I have seen nothing but positive comments about this announcement, because everybody loves Ozzy. They want Ozzy to have a good time. That's one thing that I'm sure many of you have noticed over the years, because I know I've noticed it through the years. There are many musicians that we love their music, but maybe we don't like them as a person. Ozzy, on the other hand, doesn't fall into that camp. Everyone seemed to love Ozzy, even if it was for just the antics or the way he spoke off stage when he wasn't singing, or even on stage when he wasn't singing, or just the general personality. He seemed like such a good guy, especially in the past, 20 years or so, ever since the Osbournes. He really won the hearts of everyone, and just seemed like your confused granddad that somehow got on stage and put on a good show every night, and people love that. It's endearing. He was a very endearing character in the later part of his life, and you can't fake that. It's awesome. And even in the earlier part of his life, when he was crazy and doing anything that he could ingest into his body, and biting the heads off of bats and urinating on the Alamo and doing all this crazy stuff, everybody loved his antics, and Ozzy was always entertaining. If you really think about it, he was one of the early musicians that really became an entertaining individual, more so than just a musician, right? Nowadays, that's commonplace because of social media and influencer culture and all those other things. You can't just be a musician. You have to be likable and put out vlogs and get on TikTok and do lives on Instagram and all these other things. But Ozzy was kind of a forerunner of that, because his life was just so insane, and we were all so intrigued by it that he became a 24-hour spectacle. How could you hate that? How could you hate that? Great music, great antics, great stage show, great musicians backing the guy at all times. I mean, come on. Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde, two of the greatest guitarists ever, and they were both in his band. And that's us ignoring the fact of Tony Iommi, as well as every other great guitarist he's played with, because this guy has a track record of surrounding himself with not only amazing musicians, but amazing guitarists in particular. And on top of that, one of the saddest things about Ozzy going away as far as a live entity, I hope he still has 1,000 years left in his life. I hope he outlives us all. But one of the saddest things about him going away is that the rite of passage of Ozzy in a live space is gone. You know, it's going to reach that point with all of these classic artists, but it's gone. You know, there were so many people through the years that enjoyed Ozzy in their youth, and then they taught that to their kids, and then their kids taught that to their kids, and then the kids taught that to their kids, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, forever. Now, I know there are still artists that we can do that with. Alice Cooper is one. He just keeps trucking along, and no one understands how, but somehow he's great. And there's other ones. You know, Kiss are hanging it up very soon, and you know, the numbers keep shrinking and shrinking of the bands that we all do this, but also the types of bands will change. Will Ghost be one of those bands down the line? Possibly. But we are losing all of these guys that were there from the very beginning. But when you really look at rock and roll as a genre, or at least the type of genre we look at it from the standpoint of the 60s artists and 70s artists forward, this is the first time that we are really losing a lot of the original musicians. Sure, a lot of the bands from the 60s have been long gone, but a good chunk of the 70s artists are still around and still kicking it. But a lot of them have been passing away or retiring recently, and we're even getting to the point where a lot of the 80s ones are in that boat. You know, a lot of the hair metal bands are still waving that flag and still trying really hard in clubs, and there's still a very small group of them that can headline arenas, but with Ozzy gone, it seems weird. He's the connector of all these things we just kind of mentioned. He has had big songs in all of these decades. He's had giant tours in all of these decades, and he's a connector. He's a connector, he's a tastemaker, he's an influencer, and he has been able to reinvent himself several times over without ever changing who he is, from the days of Black Sabbath to the solo career ending in the 90s only to come back even stronger than before, to the Ozfest, to the Osbournes, to the current elder statesmen of heavy metal. I want to do a whole episode talking about the evolution of Ozzy and how he has had such an important role in rock and roll and heavy metal through the years. I want to do a whole episode on that, so we're not going to concentrate on that for too long here, but it's just baffling to me that the guy has been able to reinvent himself so many times over without ever really changing who he is or what he is. Sure, he's had some run-ins with trends along the way, adding some keyboards in the music here, frosted tips there, but it's still been Ozzy. It's still been the Ozman the whole time. So at this point, there's not much left to say. I'm gonna miss seeing Ozzy on the road. I was lucky enough to see him 3 times. I saw him twice with Black Sabbath, as well as once solo with Zakk Wylde, and Slash actually opened. So altogether, that was a pretty good show as well. And the times I saw Black Sabbath were on the Ozfest when they headlined, and also really good shows, both of those. The first time, Judas Priest and Slayer, they were the bands on right before him, as well as a whole slew of bands throughout the day. And then the other time it was Rob Zombie and Velvet Revolver, because Iron Maiden had dropped on the tour, so we got Velvet Revolver to replace them. Even though it was exciting to see them, replacing Iron Maiden with Velvet Revolver it is what it is. But nonetheless, I have good memories getting to experience Ozzy in person, and it's sad to me that a lot of people won't, but we all saw this coming, and I'm glad he's finally pulling the plug and taking some time for some much needed rest, because trust me, Ozzy's given us a lot, and he deserves some time to rest and think about all the great things he's done in his life, and maybe pet some puppies. We know the guy loves animals, and I'm gonna be honest, if you don't love some type of animal, I usually judge you, so that's another positive towards Ozzy's personality. So again, I want to say thank you, Ozzy. Thank you for all of the great memories, all of the great music, and all of the great life experiences from your life that you shared to enhance all of our lives, and I hope you live another 100 years in retirement. I really, really do. This is not goodbye. This is just closing one chapter and moving on to the next. So, from all of you out there that have been indulging me through all of this, I would like to know your favorite Ozzy memory. Let me know that in the comments below, and maybe you haven't experienced him in person, so let me know your favorite Ozzy song or record, or Black Sabbath song or record, or maybe Black Sabbath experience. I don't know what you experienced with this man, but let me know in the comments below. And if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications, give this video a thumbs up, and all those other great things that every YouTuber always tells you to do. Once again, my name is Kimchi Chris. This has been Rock Bliss with Kimchi Chris, and I will see all of you on the next episode.